Hello, and welcome to the Neurology Nuts and Bolts podcast, a podcast all about constructing your career in neurology. I'm your host, Parneet Grewal, Assistant Professor of Vascular Neurology at Medical University of South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina. And today we are going to be talking about contract negotiation skills. I've been wanting to do this topic for a while, and today I have very special guests for this, Dr. Gary Gilkeson, Dr. Helmi Lutsep, and Dr. Larry Goldstein. Dr. Gilkeson is Distinguished Professor of Medicine and Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs and Faculty Development at Medical University of South Carolina. Dr. Lutsep is Professor and Interim Chair of Department of Neurology at Oregon Health and Science University and was the Chief of Neurology at VA Portland Healthcare System prior to this. And Dr. Larry Goldstein is Ruth L. Works Professor and Chair, Department of Neurology, and Associate Dean for Clinical Research at University of Kentucky Medical Center, Lexington, Kentucky. Thank you for joining us, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to speak. A little bit about the background. Negotiating skills are critical to career success, yet many physicians feel ill-equipped to negotiate for professional opportunities, and there is a lack of formal curricula addressing negotiation skills in medical training. These skills become valuable when advocating for yourself in the real world, not only during initial job negotiation, but also during contract meetings with your department chair and hospital administration. This is especially true for women and underrepresented minorities. Let's start with mindset about negotiating. Very often, we see physicians settling for the first offer and feeling uncomfortable talking about salary, resources, or time. Why do you think that happens, Dr. Gilkeson?
I think it's like you said, that they don't really have any training or prior experience at doing that if they're straight med school and residency and then into a position. So there's never been negotiation before for what they're doing other than buying a car maybe. So I think it's just a lack of ever having to need that skill and then all of a sudden being faced with needing it and not knowing really who to ask or who to turn to about that. Hopefully there are people in the different offices at that institution that will certainly help you, but you have to ask for that help, and oftentimes you don't know who to ask.
What do you think, Dr. Goldstein?
I think during medical training, it is somewhat hierarchical. I think it can be intimidating when you're trying to put yourself forward and try to achieve some of the goals that you'd like to, knowing that these the folks that you're talking to are usually in some hierarchy above where you are, and that might be intimidating for some.
What about your thoughts, Dr. Lutsep?
Yeah, I noticed that you mentioned women and, other minoritized groups. There is a difference. And I've been working with the women in our department specifically to give them skills and give them confidence, I think, more than anything. We set up a women faculty in neurology group a while ago and discussed some of the research out there and some of the ways that women can learn skills and be better at this.
Definitely. That is an important initiative, and I applaud you for that, Dr. Lutsep. So when during the interview process is the most appropriate time to negotiate?
What I would step back and start thinking a little bit about is what's negotiable and what's not negotiable first. For example, at UK, we're a public university. Everything is completely transparent. Everybody's salary, everybody's job description is posted online for everybody else to look at. And everybody else looks at everybody else's job description and responsibilities and salaries. So that's where we're starting off. If you're thinking more in a private practice kind of environment, or maybe even a non-public university environment, there may be more degrees of freedom, if you will, in what you can do. Now, even within this, in a public university, there can be differences in what individual people may be doing. Part of that is what they bring to the position when they're starting. And right now, I'm talking mainly about new people coming out of residency, coming out of fellowship, their first academic position. If you're coming into this later as an associate professor or a full professor level, the discussions are different because they bring other things to the discussion. But a straightforward clinical position for an assistant professor, it's pretty much boilerplated. The salaries are all pretty much are the same. They have to be the same. So the kind of thing that Dr. Lutsep was talking about, about salary and equities, for example, between men and women or members of groups that are underrepresented in medicine, that can't happen in this kind of setting. There may be some things that are left over from years past, but basically for new people coming in, it's pretty boilerplated, pretty straightforward, and completely the same.
That is good to know. What do you think, Dr. Gilkeson? What do you think is the most appropriate time, and what is negotiable and what isn't in your experience?
To me, I mean, we're a state institution as well, as you know, Parneet, but here that's not quite as transparent as that, as nobody knows what anybody else makes. Here, everything is negotiable, whether it's your salary, how many clinics you do, what your RVU goal is. Those are all kind of individually determined. So I think the time to do it is to hear what the offer is and what they base that on. Then you have to know, kind of what your thoughts are and what your demands are to be happy. And then, there you have to understand and I think having them present it first, because you need to know what it is they expect of you. And that has to go into your negotiating as well. If they expect you to do a totally different thing than what you expect, and that can be an issue. I think some of it is boilerplate, as Dr. Goldstein was stating, but there is, a variety of different people. Some do 6 clinics, some do 7, some do 2, and so it all kind of depends on that. And even they always claim the WRVUs are set in stone by MGMA guidelines, but if you talk to different universities, somehow they have different goals for using the same reference to AAMC or MGMA, but somehow they have a different formula. So I think it's all, you have to know what you want, and if sometimes you think it's better just to go in and get a feel for a place than to try to be viewed as a troublemaker from the start. But I think it's, figure out what those MGMA benchmarks are for your salary and for your, WRVUs, as those are published, and then you can then go from there based on that. But it's having information going in. Don't go in cold with no preparation or forethought.
What about your thoughts, Dr. Lutsep? To me, it seems that it might be different even between different universities, not to mention private and academics.
Yes, you've got 3 of us all at academic centers, and we've got slightly different variations on the theme. I think in Oregon, we fall kind of between the 2 that you've just heard Dr. Gilkeson and Goldstein describe. So we also have set salaries based on 3-year averages of AAMC figures for the West Coast, but we do have bands around that. So we have just a little bit of wiggle room. As Dr. Goldstein said, there is more flexibility in negotiation with the more years that you have in rank or the more that you bring. If you've got research funding, if you've got certain administrative skills, your package will look different.
So talking a little bit about that, how can we know our value to the department or to the university before we go to the negotiating table? What are some of the things that we should keep in mind as to we bring to the table?
Well, again, to step back, the first thing is, do you want to be at that institution? And what are you looking for? We usually don't get into the negotiations about these details until we've gotten past that first part. As I'm talking to potential faculty members, the fit has to be right. It has to be right both ways. I know the positions and the roles that we're looking for and that we need, but the potential faculty member needs to have a good idea about the environment that they're looking for and what it is they're looking to achieve in their careers. For example, if you have a high academic interest and you want to do work in area Y and you need resources X to be able to do that, if that institution doesn't have that, you never get to a negotiation standpoint, because you realize hopefully the chair or the person that's leading the discussion with you, and you realize this is not going to work out for me. As the conversations go on during that process, usually you've spoken to the chair, members of the faculty, maybe an administrator, a section head, and you have potential research colleagues, if that's what you're planning on doing, the house staff. You should be getting a really good feel for the institution and whether you'd be comfortable there and whether your own career goals are going to be met in that environment. Then you get all that taken care of first, and then you decide, okay, now what are all these other things? Similarly, same thing for the overall environment, right? If you decide, I want to live in a big city, right? I need to be in a place where I can go to the opera 5 days a week and hear a different one. That's not Lexington, Kentucky. Once a month, yeah, not once a week, right? So you need to think about all of those things first. And Dr. Gilkeson said, it sort of is like buying a car, right? You want to fall in love with the car first, and then you start negotiating and decide what you're willing to give and what you're willing to give up to be in that environment or to buy that car.
Another thing that we run into is they don't realize what track they're in. And so I assume it's the same at Kentucky and Oregon, that there are multiple different tracks. There's the clinician educator, there's associate investigator, there are all these different things. And some of them are tenure track, some of them aren't tenure track. And so it's important that they know that ahead of time, what track they're in, to be sure they're in the right track, because that's negotiable. So if you're put in one track and that's not really, if you're put in as an academic clinician, but you're not really going to do any research, then you need to ask to be changed to what is a more appropriate track for you. So that, when we do the sessions that we do, we always ask how many of you know what track you're in, and a certain number of them, have no idea, what track they're in, or whether they're on the tenure track or not on the tenure track. And so they need to have that information ahead of time, or at least negotiate it at the time, or figure out based on the grids at that university what fits best for them to be able to advance.
Definitely. So let's say you interview for a job, you really want to be in that place, you like what they are offering, but there are still some things that you might want to change. What are some of these strategies, Dr. Lutsep, that our listeners can use when negotiating?
I think what has been said already is really important, to do your homework, to have an idea of what is even possible, and don't assume that all institutions are the same, as you've just heard. They vary. By the way, our clinical tracks or clinician educator and academic track are not decided up front. You fall into a track over time. So yeah, having that information. Another difference is the regional pay differences. For example, we know on the West Coast, our salaries are lower than they are elsewhere. So those coming armed with that kind of information is really helpful. And then knowing where you might have the wiggle room. And I think being confident then about asking, saying, look, I realize you can't pay me more. However, would you consider reducing my number of weeks in the ICU, for example?
I think it is also important to realize that there are other things than just monetary compensation that you can negotiate for that overall plays a role into your job satisfaction, your career advancement, and reducing burnout and improving your well-being. So definitely important for everybody to be aware of those other things that you can ask for and negotiate. How is negotiating upfront when you're initially signing up for the job different compared to your annual contract renewal that you go with your chair once you're at a certain place? What are your thoughts, Dr. Gilkeson?
Well, I think MUSC is unfortunately unique in having to negotiate a contract every year. I don't know if that's true in Kentucky or at Oregon, but that's one of the stress points that's a disadvantage to us is, having to do that. So, again, everybody has an individual development plan where you set what your goals are. And so you need to have completed that going in to show that you've met what he or she, your chair, set as goals and that you've met them and, that you're keeping up with being promoted.
University of Kentucky, folks that are on a clinical title series are on 1-year contracts, just as the folks that it's called a research title series, they're completely on soft money. And they're on a 1-year contracts. Those agreements are renewed each year, but they're basically just renewed. They're not changed. There's nothing in particular to negotiate. What we do though is may change the mix depending upon what people are doing and which way their careers are going. So, for example, we could have a faculty that was initially on a clinical title series. And my heavens, they're bringing in, they're on a co-investigator on several extramural awards. They're bringing in clinical trials. All of a sudden, they went from being 85% clinical care to 30-40% clinical care, and the rest of their work is involved in research. Well, we may look at changing what their title series is from a non-tenure track clinical to a tenure track. Those all decisions also come at risk, right? There's a tenure clock. If you move to a tenure track and you don't attain tenure, you basically have to leave. The contract ends. So there are risks doing it in different ways, but we do try to move people depending upon what they're doing, what they want to do. My job as a chair is to allow people to do what they want to do, at the same time meeting the needs of the department and the institution and the people we serve.
What about at your institution, Dr. Lutsep, or in your experience?
It sounds like we're fortunate in that we do not negotiate contracts every year. We renew them annually, but we do not negotiate them. But as Dr. Goldstein says, sometimes a position will change over time, and it may not even start and end, annually. It may be during the year that someone's circumstances change. Occasionally, a faculty member might want to reduce FTE, for example, for personal reasons. So sometimes changes can be made. It's not rigid. You may not be doing, in fact, most people, I would say, are not doing exactly the same job that they entered doing.
For an initial contract, also, I'd be curious at Kentucky and Oregon that I think it's important, if you're a pure clinician and you get an RVU, find out what the RVU target is, but at many institutions, you can be, start out at 75% of that target the first year and 85 the next year, and then hit the mark the third year. But to expect someone to come in new and hit a, 50% benchmark, is a little bit expecting too much, I think. But I don't know what the experiences are at the other. That's not what is necessarily done here. They have to negotiate that, but I think it's important.
Yeah, and so again, the way we address it is we tell people what their target is, but there's no penalty for not making their target over the first couple of years. We anticipate that people, as they're building their clinical practices, may not achieve that target. In point of fact, they almost all do and exceed it. So it hasn't been a real practical issue, but from the standpoint of fairness, that's how we build it in. The other thing is we provide time for academic activities for all of our faculty to do scholarly work at a percentage that's again fixed. It's the same for everybody, and we guarantee that for a couple of years also. And the idea then is we have mentorship programs, and the expectation is that faculty member will obtain extramural funding to support that degree of their effort. If they don't, then we have to move them to other activities. But we try to set them up to succeed and for them to do what it is they'd like to do to move their careers ahead.
We also allowed a time for improvement of productivity. Once again, as you said, our faculty tend to exceed targets rather than miss them. And we do have incentive plans as well. I haven't heard the other two of you mention that, but if you exceed your benchmarks and RVUs, there is an incentive. We also offer 20% admin time to everyone.
Yeah, we also we have a number of different incentives. There's a productivity incentive. It's dollars per RVU above a target. After there's buyouts for doing other things. So you may have your initial RVU target, but you brought in X amount from clinical research, and you have this position for the university and X position for something else. So that lowers the RVU target. But if faculty decide, I want to do more work anyway, then they exceed their RVU targets, and that's paid in a productivity bonus. And then we also have a potential for an academic bonus, an academic performance bonus. We have a number of metrics around a whole variety of different academic activities that are metricized, if you will. People have to do a certain amount of work in order to get a full academic component from their total compensation. But then if they exceed that, and the department has a margin, we have a sharing plan for that as well. So they can get an academic productivity bonus plus a clinical productivity bonus. The other thing to think about also as you're looking at comparing places is what some of the benefits are. Different places contribute different amounts to retirement. So you have to look at, and which can be quite considerable over time. So you don't want to neglect those kinds of things as well.
Definitely. I think as a new faculty, when interviewing, there was a big learning curve to understand how different institutions work. What are some of the things aside from just monetary compensation that I need to consider? So I do think that everybody should look at the benefits along with what kind of support you're getting, what is your vacation time. We talked about negotiating, and we mentioned briefly about different tracks. Do you think there is difference in what can be negotiated between different promotional tracks?
Oh, it depends upon what, this even gets back, again, I keep saying step back. You have to sort of first figure out what it is you want to be doing, right? And then get the training and preparation to allow you to do that if you're planning on starting a new, in a new job. Like, for example, somebody who says, I want to spend 50% of my time doing research, and I want to, do epidemiology research. By the way, I've never done epidemiology research, and I have no training in it, right? So I said, that's just wonderful. How are you planning on supporting that activity? So those are conversations like Grewal knows, like I have this with our residents when they come and talk to me about these kinds of things. We talk about the different tracks, where it is you want to go, and what it's going to take to get you there, right? The analogy I use is you've got this GPS in your car, right? You know where you want to get to. You need to know where you are and the different routes to get there and how you want to do it. So in terms of the tracks, somebody who says, I want to be on, let's say, a tenure, in our case, regular title series. So there, the expectation there is, at least 50% of their total activities is coming from extramural support. Where is that supposed to come from? I don't want to set somebody up to fail, right? Somebody said, yeah, sure, I can put you on that track, right? And our tenure track is 6 years. At 5 years, we have to put together the dossier for somebody to go to the APT committee to be promoted or fired, basically, at 6 years. Well, you don't want to put somebody in that position who has little to no chance of achieving that. So that's why I said you got to sort of step back. Somebody who wants a career like that, well, then you start talking about the types of fellowships you're doing, Fellow to Faculty Transition Awards, KL8 awards if the institution has a CCTS. There are a variety of mechanisms to support new junior faculty to do those things, but you got to plan for them ahead of time. And then you can negotiate those kinds of things as you're starting a new job.
I do remember having that discussion with you, Dr. Goldstein. Do you have anything to add to it, Dr. Lutsep?
I don't really have anything to add. Yeah, as I said, ours aren't predetermined. So I guess just to keep in mind, places are different. For us, faculty receive annual reviews by our Neurology Promotion and Tenure Committee. We don't offer tenure anymore. So that's a misnomer, really. But the faculty member receives guidance from the committee about their activities in service, in research or scholarship, and in teaching. And then if the committee notices that there may be pieces missing in one of those areas, might offer suggestions or even help them network to gain some of this. So it develops more organically, I guess, over time, although certainly for certain careers, such as research, you do need a plan. You need to start early. It's one of the toughest ones.
I think one of the other things, if you're pursuing a research career, a partial research career, one of the biggest mistakes I've seen is people come in and they have no appropriate mentor at that institution. So you need to, you can have a mentor that just helps you along, but if you're doing research, you really need a mentor that knows what they're doing and is, funded and can help you to pursue that career, because it almost universally fails if someone comes in that has a research career in mind and there's nobody there that can help them get there.
So I hear two big things that people need to equip themselves with. So knowledge and planning. You need to have knowledge of what they are offering, what else is out there, and you need to be prepared.
Yeah, planning and preparation, I think, are really, really critical, right? If you're considering a place, go to their website first, read what you can. If they have an annual report, try to get that and read about it. know who else is there, know what the institution's strengths are. As I said, you're interested in doing health outcomes research, and there's nobody in the department that's doing health outcomes research, and there are no resources for it. It's not going to work real well. The mentoring programs are also, as Dr. Gilkeson said, are really, really critical.
Definitely. Now, coming a little bit to your program where you actually talk to and teach women faculty about negotiation, Dr. Lutsep. So how do you think negotiating skills can address racial and gender inequities and bias that can create barriers to career advancement?
It comes down to that being equipped with all the information that you can have. The more that you have of that, the less of that inequality and the more you can reduce bias. In this group, we discussed writing letters of recommendation, for example, and the fact that the terms used for women are different than the terms used for men. So, for example, women are described as being hardworking always, where men might be described as being leaders. So we have to be very thoughtful, as we do some of these things that we just took for granted in the past, and try to break through some of these barriers and increase equity.
So we talked a lot about negotiating and how we should negotiate. And Dr. Gilkeson, you mentioned at certain places, everything is on the table. When do you think can negotiating work against us? What are some of the pitfalls? And should we get professional help prior to signing a contract, Dr. Gilkeson?
It's reasonable to have, a lawyer look over the contract to make sure there's not some hidden clause. I think that's less of a problem in academics than it is in private practice, but still it wouldn't hurt to, have a professional review the contract, although I'm not sure that's necessary. I think you have to select, and we tell people to know, what their no-go, their red line is, that they know they're not going to be happy if that's the case. And then you walk out the door, but you have to be willing to walk out the door if that's not met. But you have to make sure it's reasonable. I mean, you can't come in out of fellowship and say, I want to be a endowed professor, but you can set certain guidelines that are important for you and your lifestyle.
What are your thoughts on this, Dr. Goldstein? When can negotiating work against us, and what are the things we should be aware of?
Well, again, this is a discussion. It's not adversarial, because what we're trying to do is have a long-term relationship. The last thing I want is to bring a faculty member on board and have them leave, in a year or two to a parallel position. So, a lot of this is truth in advertising. And if the way we do this is we produce what's called a terms outline. And it's sort of a bullet point of what the major portions of the job are, what the expectations are, and what we're agreeing to. And before we even move a contract, they call them here offer letters, but we move that ahead. We've sort of come to agreement about that and make sure that we're on the same page. As neurologists, we are in it's a seller's market, if you will, right? You all know that unless you're in the Northeast, there's a major gap between the supply and demand of neurologists. In Kentucky, we're about 25 to 30% down. Okay. So you all bring a fair amount of worth, if you will, to any negotiation, right? To any job that you're going to go to. The time when it does become an issue is for more advanced positions. If I'm recruiting somebody, for example, to be a program leader, right? I want to know not only what they want for them, but what they're going to bring to the program and to our faculty that they're going to be helping to support and lead. If it's all about them, my conversation's over.
Dr. Lutsep, what are your thoughts on getting professional help prior to signing?
I would recommend that an applicant speak with trusted mentors. I think sometimes it helps to put something into context that can look confusing, or sometimes it's unclear how something stacks up between different offer letters. So the mentor may be able to help make some sense of that, and even help with questions to ask, because they might not know the answers on how things vary between institutions. On the other hand, I don't know how much value it would really be to have a lawyer take a look. And I don't think that most of our applicants are doing that. The letters really are so standard, and they are essentially templated. So we have very little wiggle room when they're approved by our School of Medicine.
These offer letters are completely templated. We have very little wiggle room in things that we can change. Again, some of those bullet points, we can try to have some clarity around some of those items. But for the most part, they're completely boilerplated, and it's sort of like being in an Epic note that's templated. You drop down and put in whatever. The choices are limited. And by the way, we have had some people that have had lawyers look at them, and they've come up with line 16, word 7 needs this, and we try to put it through the university, and they say, no, we're not changing the language, take it or leave it. So, but some people want to do it, and they say, fine. Again, it gets to that aspect of transparency.
This was very helpful and a great discussion. And I'm sure I'm going to implement some of the tips going forward in my career to be always prepared and always plan. So lastly, before we finish, any key takeaways you would like to provide?
I think some of the things that you just mentioned that you got out of it are the key take-home points: is do your homework and be prepared.
I will just echo what you guys have said. Preparation is key. I'm just going to add one caveat, especially if you're looking at a position in academic medicine. It is complicated. And if you don't understand it all from the beginning, don't worry about that. You cannot plan out every detail. It is complicated.
Yeah, and I think what people, again, at the entry stage are doing is they may be looking at any number of different potentials. And just as when you are trying to make a decision, first, again, go in with your eyes open, know the strengths and weaknesses, if you will, of any position. But then when you're making comparisons, make sure you're comparing apples to apples. As I said, we talked about health benefits. We talked about a little bit about, maternity benefits. I talked about contributions to retirement or retirement accounts. You have to think about all of those things also. So especially if you're looking at two potential jobs that are otherwise sort of equivalent.
Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Gilkeson, Dr. Lutsep, and Dr. Goldstein for offering your valuable insight. Neurology Nuts and Bolts podcast was created by Sarah Schaefer. This podcast is not recorded as an official podcast of any institution or organization. The podcast is unfunded. Opinions are those of the individual participants. Music is by Audrey Nath, artwork by Shivani Ghoshal. Want more content like this? Be sure to subscribe to the Neurology Nuts and Bolts podcast wherever you go to hear more about constructing your career in neurology. Follow us on Twitter at NeuroBolts and on Facebook at Neurology Nuts and Bolts to stay up to date on new content. Thanks for joining us.